A little while ago, a couple weeks ago, I was on stream and I talked about a movie called The House. Just talked a little bit about it. And I recently rewatched it twice. So now I've seen the movie three times. And I think my perspective on it has changed a little bit. And I think I like talking about movies and shows that my perspective has changed on. I think that's a really interesting thing to talk about because there's a thought process involved in it, I guess. But with The House, basically, the last time I saw it was maybe a couple of years ago, pretty much right after it came out, I think. And my first impression was I really liked the second short film because it's an anthology of three short films. I really liked the second one. I thought the third one was okay, and I really didn't care for the first one. That was my first impression of the film. Then I watched it again, and I kind of felt the same way. And that was very recently. But then on the third watch, which was also very recently, it was only maybe a couple days later, I kind of changed my mind because I still didn't like the first short film all that much. But I very much enjoyed the third one, which I only thought was okay at first, but it actually grew on me a lot in the most recent watch. So, firstly, I guess I should talk about the animation, because it is an animated movie, and I really, really like animation. And I guess it's an indie animation movie, and I'm really interested in independent animation. I'm reading Phil Vischer's autobiography right now, and that's a really interesting story. I'm definitely gonna review that book when I'm done with it because I'm really enjoying it, and he's very important, I think, in the history of animation and the history of independent animation. The third time I saw it was in 4K, by the way, because we have a 4K TV now. And it was stunning in 4K. It's a really good looking movie. It's stop motion. And I remember the first time I saw the film, I was stunned by that third short film for its animation because the protagonist is this cat character. And the way she moved, I thought, was so natural that I kind of thought these people did for stop motion what Marlon Brando did for acting. Where Marlon Brando was the first person to make naturalistic performances the order of the day in movies, because movie acting came out of silent film acting and play acting. And in silent films and plays, you can't act as naturalistically, or it's not encouraged to act so naturalistically, especially plays, I think. Silent films are maybe a little bit of a different story, but plays, you have to be able to communicate things to an audience that can only see what they can see. You're very limited in what you can show them. You can't get as intimate as you can with a movie. But Marlon Brando realized, actually, we can do whatever we want. We can show whatever we want, and so why don't we act like real people? And this movie, this cat character, I just thought when I first saw her animation, I thought it was the most amazing, impressive, naturalistic display of human micro expressions and micro gestures. There is just something impressively, incredibly naturalistic about the animation in this movie. And in 2 out of the 3 short films, they are animating animal people, animal furry characters. And another thing I really like about the furry characters is that they're people, and they have all the naturalistic motions of people, but then they add little animal elements to them as well. Like when they get irritated, their ears twitch, stuff like that. And I think that's really, really neat too. Just adding something that's not human to the picture while still making it feel very natural. And in fact, the first short film is the one that doesn't have furry characters, and it is my least favorite. And not just because of the lack of furry characters, although I do think that's a part of it, because the humans are kind of boring looking, and one of the issues I had with it is their faces are very tiny and their heads are big. So it's a style choice. They have big heads and tiny faces on those big heads. Maybe if 1 or 2 characters looked like that, it would work a little bit better for me, but all of the characters look like that. And I guess the problem I have is that the faces aren't very expressive, and they don't move very interestingly either, these characters. They're just kind of boring to look at. Although they still do interesting things, like there's a part where at the very beginning of the film, the dad's his eyelid kind of twitches in a very subtle way. His eyelid twitches out of kind of irritation. That was, I don't know how they did that. That was a very well done little move, and so there's a lot of proficiency in the animation. I just thought that the character designs were a little bit dull, and I thought that short film was pretty dull. And my issue with that first short film is that, or for one thing, I didn't find the protagonist very interesting. The protagonist was this little girl. She didn't really have much of a personality. There wasn't really anything I could connect with her. Like, she didn't have any goals or hopes or ambitions. She just didn't really have much to offer as a character. And the other thing was the story. There's a kind of, I guess you could call it a twist that happens. It's not really a plot twist in the traditional sense, but it's the resolution of the horror story, because it is a horror story. And it feels kind of Pulp Fiction-y. It feels kind of like a haunted house story. Like, my brother showed me this really awful British movie that had just a bunch of ghost stories in it. It was kind of like that. It was it was like a ghost story you would read in a Pulp Fiction, not novel, but you know those books that are like compilations of scary ghost stories? Yeah, it was like one of those. And so it was kind of, I don't know, when you understand what's going on, then it's just kind of a boring slog to get to the end. Because what's going on is the parents of this little girl, they're kind of, the dad is insecure because his family doesn't respect him and doesn't respect the fact that he's kind of someone from a higher station in life, but he's living in this more humble house. And he then gets greeted by an architect who tells him that he's going to give him this big fancy estate for free. He's going to build it for free, and because he's this artist who he doesn't care about money, he's just about the art of it. And then it's a little bit eerie, it's a little bit weird for the whole film. It's kind of building an atmosphere. And slowly, what happens is that slowly the mom and the dad start turning into curtains and a chair. The dad starts turning into a chair, the mom starts turning into curtains, and it is well done the way they do it. It actually, like, I think it's okay as a story, but it's just kind of boring. And once you know what's going on, it doesn't really offer any surprises after that. And so it's just kind of like, okay, when is this going to end? My mom liked it, though, because the reason I watched this movie the third time is that I wanted to show it to my mother. And she really enjoyed that first story. So I don't think it's a bad story. I just personally found it a little bit dull, and I found the character design a little bit dull. It just, compared to the other two, which are really, really good, that first one just feels kind of lackluster to me. I guess it is very psychological, so I'll give it that. It does have one or two interesting points in it, but the second one is my favorite. The second one is about a rat who is trying to refurbish a house. He invested all of his money into this house, and then he's going to sell it. He's going to refurbish it and sell it. And he's having a lot of trouble with the refurbishing, and he's having trouble with an infestation of fur beetles. And I thought this one was really well done because I loved the rat character in it. I thought he was so compelling to watch. He was humorous. He was funny. And what's really interesting about him is that he's totally alone. You only ever see him talking to people on his Bluetooth headset. You never see him actually interact with other people until we get to the open house that he has. And even then, the other people don't engage with him. They don't seem to like him. They're just ignoring him. And so this is a very lonely character, very isolated. And it's slowly revealed that he is suffering from mental illness. And he seems very normal on the outside. But as you learn more about him, you start to see he's not really all there, is he? Like, for instance, his solution to the fur beetle problem is to douse the room in a bunch of poison and vacuum up the dead beetles. But he's not even wearing a respirator while he's throwing all this poison around. It's insane. He's just throwing all this poison around, this powdery poison that can get in the air, get in his lungs, and he's not wearing a respirator. And at first you're kind of thinking, is this just like a weird flaw with the movie? And then after he's done with that, there's all these dead beetles on the ground. He mops them up without sweeping first. He doesn't vacuum the floor. He's just mopping them. And again, I'm kind of thinking, is this is this just a flaw with the movie? Do people not know how cleaning works? You sweep first and then you mop. But I'm not so sure about that, because I think that it's intentional. I think it's meant to signal that there's something off about this guy. Because another scene, we see him. He has all these boxes left over from the refurbishing, and he's finishing off the refurbishing, and he decides the best way to get rid of them is to pile them up in the backyard and light them on fire, like a big bonfire of these boxes. Like, is this guy nuts? Why would he? He's in a residential area in a city. Don't light a fucking bonfire. And so it's just little things like that. You see, like, is this guy crazy? And then throughout the film, you see him having these phone calls with this person who we assume is a woman. He's talking to this woman and calling her affectionate names, and like sending "I love you" texts. A picture. He did a picture of him doing one of these when he got his kitchen set delivered, and he was installed, and he was like, "Love you." And so you're okay. So this guy has some sort of girlfriend who's not there, and he's communicating with her over a distance. But then you see later on, the girlfriend just hangs up on him in the middle of conversation, and it's like, huh, okay. And then after that, he's having another conversation with her, where you only see it on his end. You only hear what he's saying. And he's like, I'm sorry, I won't call you darling ever again, sweetheart. Ow! And then she hangs up, I guess. That's a very funny moment there. But it makes you think, okay, so this is someone who doesn't even like him, who he thinks likes him. It's getting weirder. And then the police show up at his door and say, do you have a dentist named Dr. blah blah blah? Well, yeah, you've been harassing him. You've been calling him darling and sweetheart. You've been telling him things that he doesn't want to know about your life, personal details that he has no interest in. He's your dentist. Don't harass him anymore, or there will be consequences. And it's like, so this whole time, he's just been deluding himself into thinking his dentist is in love with him. His male dentist, by the way. Really great twist that I did not see coming. But it just really shows, okay, this guy is really mentally ill. This guy is deluded. And I just love how it was kind of a slow build up to that. Really well done. The fact that he's so isolated, he doesn't have anybody to tell him that he's wrong, or to tell him to change, or to help him in any way. And we don't really have a lot of context on who he is going in, and so we don't realize just how bad he has it until kind of almost toward the end of the film. But he's such a likable character, and what I love about him is he has this earnestness, and you sympathize with him. You sympathize with the problem he's going through. He invested all of his money into this thing. It needs to pay off. And you sympathize with all the effort. He's a very hard worker. He's putting all of this effort into this house, and it's just not working. He still has all these problems to fix. In the open house, like, everything goes wrong. And it's becoming increasingly clear that it's going to be really hard for him to sell this house. And so it's driving him crazy, and you really sympathize with him in his position. And I love that. I love that it's this, this character who's mentally ill, but he still feels very normal and relatable. And that's really, I think, good representation of mentally ill people, because they can be very normal on the outside, and they can seem normal, and they can be relatable. And you can sympathize and connect with them. That's also why I really love the movie Taxi Driver. One of my favorite movies. It's really kind of about a very similar sort of character, someone who seems normal on the outside, but when you really see what's going on with him, he definitely has a mental illness problem. But it's a really clever story, the way they structure it. I love how in the beginning of that short film, it's very slow. It really takes its time, and it's just showing him having these Bluetooth phone calls and doing work on the house and dealing with the pests. And it's very claustrophobic, it's very isolated, and you feel very alone with this character. And you really get a sense, you really get to know him, I think, through watching him go about his day. And then it starts to pick up later. After the open house, we get these fur beetles who are disguised as rats, which is a really clever idea. It shows there's the one that's really tall, like a larva, and then the one that's short and round, like a beetle. And it's really interesting, that concept. I don't really know. I don't know how it's supposed to work. It doesn't really make any sense that they're these giant beetles who look like rats. And they have these interesting little voices with these accents that sound very foreign, but are kind of hard to identify. And it makes them feel very kind of strange and alien, and not quite, I would say human, but not quite rat. And it's great because they then kind of lead him on and pretend that they're interested in buying his house, but they're really just trying to stay there as long as possible and kind of gradually move into this house without buying it. It's an interesting parallel to the whole infestation situation with the actual fur beetles. And it's interesting how, this rat is very deluded, and so with someone who doesn't have a proper grasp on reality, it's easy to see how that guy can kind of be manipulated by these beetles and not realize that they're beetles. But we're not really entirely sure what's going on, or what these things are. Because they're giant rat-sized beetles, and they talk. So it's like, is this a strange kind of metaphor? Is this all hallucination on his part? It's not entirely clear, and I like that. I like the fact that it doesn't make sense. I like the fact that it's a little bit more dreamlike in that way. It's not supposed to make sense. It's supposed to be a little bit illogical. And of course, in the end, he kind of totally loses his grip on reality and becomes a rat. Not a humanoid rat, but just a rat. And I thought that was really clever. I thought it was clever that these characters were rats, because it makes it, rats are common household pests. So there's that element to it, that he's being the pest in his dentist's life. Meanwhile, he's dealing with this pest problem at home, and he doesn't see the connection there. It was just really clever, really well done, and just a great character, very easy to sympathize with. Definitely my favorite of the three. But then the third one really grew on me. Because like I said, the first couple times I saw it, I just thought it was okay. But then watching it the third time with my mother, I really really got a lot out of the third story, because it's about a cat who is trying to fix up, trying to refurbish her home. She lives in the house this time. She's not trying to sell it. She's trying to live in it. So similar setup to the last one, but totally different execution. Because the big thing that's going on in this short film is that there's flooding. That's severe flooding. That's flooded the whole town to the point where all the buildings are underwater except for this house, which is situated on a hill that's just barely above the water level. So there's nothing nearby. There's no businesses, there's no homes. It's all underwater. And she's trying to fix up this house because she has the plan that if she fixes it up, she will get tenants to live in the rooms, and that will pay for the cost of refurbishing, and that will pay for living costs and stuff for a while. And then she can eventually move out the tenants and live there alone by herself. But it's interesting. What's really clever, this is probably, honestly, it's probably the cleverest of the three films. What's really clever about it is the way it kind of changes how you view her situation and the characters around her. Very naturally. Without it feeling cheap or like the movie was tricking you. Because it wasn't really tricking you. But you see things from her perspective at first, and then as you kind of learn more and think more about what's going on, you realize that she's wrong. Because what's going on is she has these two tenants who are not paying her any rent. And you're kind of frustrated. Like, the one guy is just paying her in fish, and then the woman is paying her in these crystals, these healing crystals, because she's a new ager. And at first, you're with her on that. You're frustrated because it's like, these people are just taking advantage of her. They're just living there and not paying any money. And then she's doing all this hard work. She's doing repairs, and you can't even give her any money for it. And they're like, oh, by the way, the water is brown, so you should fix that. And you're like, bro, if you want her to fix that, then why don't you give her some money? So it's frustrating. And you're on her side. And then slowly start to realize, hang on. There's no jobs in this area at all. There's nothing in this area. There's nothing. It's all flooded. There's nobody here. So these people can't even really get jobs, these two tenants she has. And then you realize, oh, she used to have more tenants, and they did pay rent, but they all left. Well, why did they leave? Because of the flooding. Because nobody can live there anymore. It's not livable. And then you realize, oh, she's doing all this work to try to fix this house, deluding herself into thinking that's going to attract tenants. And it's not, because nobody's going to come there anyway. Nobody can live there. It's unlivable. And then you realize, oh, she can't even live there for very long, because soon the water continues to rise, and soon her house is going to be underwater too. And then you realize, oh, these two unpaying tenants, these two ungrateful unpaying tenants, were actually just the two people who decided to stick around when the other ones left because they were her friends. And they felt bad for her, and they wanted to be there for her because they knew she wouldn't have anyone else. And they wanted to leave a long time ago, but they stuck around for her. They were there to help her. And they couldn't pay her even if they wanted to, because there's no work. And so this is a lost cause. She shouldn't even be doing this. But you realize it's because she has this sentimental attachment to this house. She doesn't want to leave this house because it was the house she lived in as a kid with her parents. And her parents, it's kind of implied that her parents are dead. And this is kind of her memory of them that she's trying to keep alive. She's trying to keep this house because it has all these memories and this sentimental value to her, and she's never lived anywhere else, and she's afraid to move on. She's afraid to change. And so it's really clever how without and it's all obvious in hindsight. It's all obvious, you know. In hindsight, it's like, oh, yeah, of course nobody's coming here because of the flood, and of course this is a lost cause, and of course she should move on. But the film really gets you to see it from her perspective at first, and from her perspective, she's doing all this hard work fixing up this house that's going to pay off, and these people aren't helping her. But actually, they are the ones helping her because they're trying to get her to move on. But it's really hard to do that. It's hard to communicate to someone, hey, you got to leave, when this is like so important to them that they stay. And so they're just doing their best to support her and be there for her while she's kind of deluding herself into thinking that she can fix this problem. So I just thought that was so clever, and that was such a good story. And it really resonated with me on the third viewing in a way that it didn't before. It's a really great movie, honestly. I think this... at first, I didn't know... I thought it was imperfect. I was like, this movie, it's okay. Has good spots. It's interesting, well animated, but it has story issues. But man, the more I watch it, it really grows on me. I still don't particularly love that first short film, but I think it has enough in it that it's worth watching. But the other two are just so good that, I mean, it's got to be... It's kind of becoming one of my favorite animated movies, honestly, because it's just got incredible animation and really good stories with really interesting or relatable characters. Again, the cat character, a very good character, very relatable, very sympathetic. So yeah, I would really recommend watching The House if you haven't. It's a Netflix original. It's very new. It's only a couple of years old. And it's great independent animation, really, really high quality. Really unique, really original. I just love it. And I think I'm becoming more appreciative of animation lately. I've always loved animation, but I think I'm becoming more of kind of an aficionado of animation in a way. I'm starting to really appreciate it as an art form in a way that I never quite did before. And I'm really interested in its history and politics and everything surrounding it. It's definitely not something that I want to do personally, but it's something that I just am always so impressed by the skill and craftsmanship and the artistry of it. I think it's incredible, the ability to bring things to life. I think that's an amazing skill. And I'm always so impressed when I see it, because it's like magic, especially because I don't know how to do it. I I I don't know how to do it, and so it's such an amazing feat to me. It's so mystifying to me to see people do it so well. And I think the medium is going through a lot of improvements lately in the past few decades. I'd like to I'd like to make more videos just about animation and about animation history and stuff, because I've been thinking a lot about it lately. And I do have a lot of thoughts about it that would be fun to share. So maybe I should put some effort into actually writing something about animation. One thing I wanted to make a video about was the kind of transition that happened in animation during the 1990s and 2000s. That's a really fascinating story. There's so much to go into in that, about how suddenly animation was a money-making thing. Before it was hard to make any money on animation, and then that kind of changed in the 1990s, where Disney was suddenly making a whole lot of cash on their movies, and they had this winning formula, and everyone wanted to copy it, everyone wanted to get in on it. So you saw this massive kind of explosion of animation happening, where feature animation was becoming a much broader thing than it had ever been before. But then that's also the time that we see computer animation enter, and that changes everything. And then Disney goes through this interesting sort of identity crisis in the 2000s, where their movies aren't as successful as they were in the 90s, and they're thinking of switching to computer animation. And just the politics of it, with Lasseter and Katzenberg and Eisner, and there's just so much there's such an interesting story in there somewhere. I think I would really like to make a video about it, to explore that whole era and what was going on. But I'm not really sure exactly what the angle of that video will be, but definitely an idea I have in my mind. But yeah, I guess this was a review of the house, and also a little thing about just animation in general. That's all I have to say. Look forward to something about animation in the future. Don't know when.